Good afternoon, everybody. This afternoon's proceedings are going to be transmitted live after a 10-minute period has elapsed. Those with mobile devices may use them to report what they hear in the hearing room, but only after 10 minutes have elapsed since the event that they're reporting. They may not be used for photography or recording.
HN 118, I'd like to ask you about your reporting on Camp for Climate Action. It may assist if we put up on screen, please, HN 118's witness statement, page 56, please. So at the bottom of the page we can see you refer to Camp for Climate Action and state that, as far as I can recall, my involvement in the Camp for Climate Action was limited to attending the camp just outside Heathrow Airport in 2007. So just to be clear, is that correct, that that was the sum of your reporting on Camp for Climate Action, the Heathrow?
I think so. I mean, there may have been some reporting in advance of it, but yes, largely. The original intention was that I wouldn't go at all, as I was, I should have been in my withdrawal phase, if that makes sense.
Well, can you help us with that in terms of the timing of this? Because I think you alluded to it yesterday, some reluctance on your part. Why were you required to attend this camp at this time, when, as you indicated, this was towards the end of your deployment, you're running your deployment down?
I was told that there was an enormous amount of sort of pressure coming down from on high, and that there was a requirement to provide coverage on it, and that I would be required to go.
I wonder if we could look at paragraph 152. So it's just over page. We have it on screen. So here you say, I was not disappointed to leave the event. However, I was really only there because of a direct tasking through the SDS to attend. My intention after the G8 conference in Heiligendamm was to withdraw gradually and attend as few events as possible. But counter to almost all my previous experience in the SDS, DCI Flood expressly directed me to attend the Camp for Climate Action. So that's as you recall it, yes?
Yes.
I presume that this was because the MPS was the lead police force for the event, but it was an uncomfortable position to be in towards the end of my deployment, particularly given the lack of future for the SDS. So at this stage, was it clear to you that the SDS was about to come to an end?
Oh yes, absolutely. And before then.
Did you provide any feedback to DCI Flood when he expressly directed you to attend?
It had been a conversation before then. I'd sort of argued the case. I was literally right at the end, and it was an unusual thing to do. And so I'd had a couple of goes at pleading my case. I didn't want to attend. It would seem counter to the sort of withdrawal strategy, such as it was. And we'd reached the end of that conversation, and at the end of the day, he was my boss and he directed me to go, and I went. There was an awful lot of, as I understand it, an awful lot of pressure coming in from various ministers and the like because of the perceived risk to Heathrow shutting down because of people getting onto the airfield, onto the runways and onto the aprons around Heathrow.
Perhaps if we just go to paragraph 155. So it is just over, go over the page, please. So here you refer to one of your reports, and we'll come to the report. You say, my raw report records the decisions taken at a pre-Camp for Climate Action coordination meeting. It does not directly refer to the planning of criminal activity, but in several places it refers to spiky or potentially violent direct action. It also records that the consensus was against trespass onto the aircraft operating areas of Heathrow, which will have helped the initial planning for the policing. ultimately the key figures in the dissent network were aware that they could not prevent individuals or small groups from trespassing onto the runways and taxiways, and they were sufficiently alert to the possibility that they wanted to develop media lines to take in the event that this did happen. Now, you described before lunch, when I was asking you about direct action and leaving aside what we discussed yesterday about the suicide vest plot, that as far as direct action is concerned in this country, that the high point for you was engaged in sit-down protests in roads.
Yes.
And this, right at the end of your deployment, refers to spiky, potentially violent direct action, people on the taxiways, or on runways. So was this, in your mind, potentially much more serious than the areas that you were deployed into in the years leading up to this point? You were describing, we looked at various involvement in looking at email groups, checking websites, matters of that nature. But right at the end of your deployments, just as you're coming out of the SDS, you're suddenly asked to deploy into this particular operation. Was it as set out here, potentially violent, direct action, people going onto a runway? Was there real concern about
I wouldn't say it was violent. We kept hearing from various people who were reportedly analysing the risk around it, of the danger to people if they had gone through the fence and tried to get inside Heathrow. I mean, I remember on more than one occasion saying I thought that was incredibly unlikely, but there was just so much concern, I think, at some senior level that it was a possibility that they wanted some measure of coverage from within the camp so that it could be reported back if a particular group had decided to try and go through the fence.
Would you have expressed it in those ways to your managers? Incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And they would have expressed it too, back up. Well, I'm highly confident that they would have expressed that view too. Right. But I think they were getting pulled into meetings at very high levels where other people had a very different opinion.
May I just go to that raw report that you quote in this paragraph? So it is 0074614 at tab 470, which is in volume 9, please. So there's quite a lengthy set of your raw reports here, but we can see that the first page refers to climate camp. Activists plan to hold a climate camp in the vicinity of London Heathrow Airport between the 14th and 21st of August. The camp will be along very much the same sort of lines as the one that occurred close to Drax Power Station last year. Now, pausing there, we needn't turn it up, but is it right that you reported on that to the extent that it was happening, but you didn't attend that particular climate camp? Is that right? This was the first climate camp that you actually physically attended, the one at Heathrow in 2007?
Yes. Specifically a climate camp, I think, yes.
Yes, thank you. The initial meet-up point for arriving activists not involved, the first occupation of the site will be Staines Railway Station. And as you go through this, you're providing details about it. Could we forward to page 11, please? Now, is this a copy-paste from the part of the material that is produced and disseminated by those that are in the climate camp action? Is that, would you agree with that? So we can see at the bottom, police liaison strategy discussion. So this is, if you like, an internal climate camp document that's circulated. And if we look at this here, police liaison strategy discussion, feedback on what council liaison has done so far. Aims to keep the camp safe, peaceful and effective. To use our role as a networking opportunity to spread information about climate camp. The document goes on, but does that tie in with what you were describing before, that it was very unlikely that there would be problems with this event, the very fact that there was a police liaison strategy that was being discussed in this controlled manner, does that... Yeah.
Yeah, entirely.
And so the question that I've asked you a number of times in terms of, well, was it justified to have an undercover police officer in this group, particularly when they are circulating typed police liaison strategies? Would you agree or disagree that it was unnecessary?
I suppose it would always be desirable from a belt and braces perspective to have someone or some means of actually ensuring that that is actually what was going to go ahead. But yes, in the main, I think there have been other ways to do it.
In terms of the police liaison, would you have had any input into the nature of those in climate camp to their liaison with the police? So, for example, would you have advised or given suggestions in some way, or were you so much on the periphery that that wasn't realistic?
No, I had no input into that at all.
I wonder if we could please move to MPS 0075737 at tab B131, please, which is in volume 3. So we saw an example on one of these before. So is this the events log that this is a document that you produced yourself, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So if we look at page 3, please. And so we can see page 3, it refers to the 12th of August, this is 2007, worked day, rostered rest day, worked voluntarily. Online, check various websites, e-lists associated with autonomous left, answer emails, extract intelligence for inclusion in Intel reports, open events log for week, securely archive and backup data, write up reports, and then this, out to Heathrow Airport area, re-climate camp, engage locally, re-major public order event. And is this the recording in shorthand of your participation in climate camp on that day?
Yes, it looks that way.
And it says night spent at same location, re-above. Is this pointing to a time when you physically camped at the Heathrow Airport? Were you spending time in tents there?
Yes, yeah. I think I just had a tarp, in fact, at Heathrow, but it's I slept overnight there, absolutely.
Could we take that down and refer to MPS 0075611, which is at tab C473. So this is reporting that's dated the 6th of August 2007, so it's in volume 9. And in relation to this, we can see again repeated intelligence information about climate camp. Can you see the second report? It says activists associated with the Camp for Climate Action are attempting to recruit activists to act as legal observers throughout the period that the camp will be established. They are particularly keen to put teams out during the times that initial occupation of the camp is taking place and during the direct action phase over the 24 hours from Sunday lunchtime. In relation to legal observers, was your understanding that legal observers were individuals who were there to perhaps record what happened, what police officers did? Could you just help us with what your understanding of the legal observers was, please?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly it. I think they were there to record any interaction between activists, protesters and police officers, and to sort of make a record of exactly what was happening, sometimes using video or photographs, making notes.
You've already indicated that you indicated at the time that you were reluctant to participate in this. But would you agree that there was no need to provide reporting on climate camp legal observers, because those individuals are not individuals that are going to cause any public order difficulties?
I suppose I would, but I would just say that this was exactly the type of activity or detail that, you know, the desk were asking for in order to sort of enrich their understanding of what was actually going on the ground. You know, it's exactly the sort of thing that they wanted us to try and find out and give them detail about. So having been tasked to go, I suppose I felt it necessary to do that.
If we could take that down, please. Move to MPS 0075740. So it's in the next tab. It's C474. And could we please have a look? This is reporting from you 9th of August 07, so it's the same period. Have a look at that document there. So RW, your initials for your code name, Climate Camp Reports, and then it says held by C Squad. So could you just assist us with this? Is this your reporting? Because it's got RW Climate Camp Reports and then it says held by C Squad. Could you just help us with the wording of this? Are you familiar with the layout of this?
No, not at all. Okay. I would imagine RW is at the top. Obviously, it's my code name, and this looks like some form of note from C Squad themselves, I would think. I'm not sure.
In relation to the middle of the page, the reference to Bindman's solicitors, does Climate Camp legal support, and then there's a telephone number for Bindman solicitors. Is that anything to do with you producing that information, or is this C Squad?
Not at all. No, I'm not familiar with it at all.
And again, in terms of your initials at the top, they are the initials for Ring Wraith, but you're not able to assist why they appear on this document?
No, I would imagine it's someone in C Squad writing up some notes about something, and they just know I'm there. Perhaps they, you know, the desk would have, if you were deployed out to a particular place. At the end of the day, the aim is to provide information, you know, that informs the desk to perform their function there. So it might well be that they've just put my initials there because they know I'm actually, forgive me, I didn't make a note of the date, whether I'm actually at that camp there or I'm in a position to provide coverage of it later.
Well, I wonder if you could just move forward in time a month. If we can take that down, please, and move to MPS 0076114, which serves at your tab C510, which is in volume 9. I wonder if we can bring that up on screen. So this is more familiar set out of your process reports, yes?
Yes. Yeah, that looks like it.
This one says Climate Camp Legal Action. The legal support team that ran throughout the Heathrow Climate Camp are pulling together a large amount of information with a view to taking legal action against the Metropolitan Police. They believe that many activists were unlawfully detained, either by way of arrest or in so-called kettles or containments on the street. The team are being assisted by sympathetic solicitors at both Bindman's and Hickman and Rose, both firms from London, and by individuals at Irwin Mitchell in Manchester. Advice has been disseminated about obtaining legal aid and initial free interviews with solicitors. So, in fact, we have reference to Bindman's in one of your reports. And again, just thinking about that, can you recall, sort of right at the end of your deployment, including information such as this about Bindman's and other firms? Is that something that you recall?
No, not at all. It's just definitely one of mine. It doesn't look familiar at all.
Well, let's go back out of it, please. So in terms of this information at Climate Camp, this is not a report that has your code name on, but the inquiry's understanding is that that is one of your reports and that you provided the intelligence in relation to that. Are you saying that you don't recall providing this?
No, not at all.
Unlike other undercover officers that the inquiry has heard evidence from, you were never arrested during your deployment. Is that right?
I was never formally arrested, no.
Well, when you say you were never formally arrested, what do you mean by that?
Well, I was detained. Are we talking about England, specifically England and Wales?
In England and
Yes.
Wales, yes.
No, I was never arrested. I was stopped and searched and lots of times, but I was never arrested.
Okay. And in terms of witnessing others being arrested, how many of those that you spied upon did you witness their arrests? So not yourself.
No, I understand. No, not many. Once or twice, I think.
Did you ever witness events that were relevant to their arrest? So, for example, we have seen examples of individuals being arrested and an undercover officer being present, either arrested themselves or witnessing what happened before the arrest. Were you ever in that position, i.e., potentially being a relevant witness? I know you yourself said you weren't arrested, but were you ever in a position where you'd seen something that someone had been arrested for that you could have provided potentially evidence about?
I don't think so, no.
Throughout your deployment, were you ever involved in any discussions about others' criminal proceedings? So, in other words, privy to legally, professionally privileged information at any point?
Other UCOs?
No, other activists.
No, I don't think so.
I wonder if we can please turn up MPS 0704569, please, which is at tab B87 in volume 3. Now, in relation to this, it refers to a desk meeting report, 17th of November 2005. We can see the duration, 11th of 2:30, field officers present, and you are one of those. And if we can turn over the page, please, to now we can see topics discussed. Now, in relation to this, have you seen this document recently at all?
No, I haven't.
Do you remember seeing this at the time that it was produced?
No.
Because it refers to activist post G8 views, 2012 Olympics, climate change issues, DSEI, refers to a number of individuals, including Helen Steele. And then, can you see at F? It refers to EDO, implications of legal action in connection with Lawson Cruttenden, in connection with injunctions. So there seems to be a record of a desk meeting that you were in attendance, and one of the items was implications of a legal action in connection with a firm of solicitors involved in injunctions. Does that ring any bells?
No, it doesn't, I'm afraid. Not at all.
Would you agree that it would have been inappropriate for you as an undercover officer to report on legal actions against the police or actions relating to civil proceedings involving the Metropolitan Police.
Yes.
Were you ever advised by your managers in relation to matters of that nature that, well, look, you mustn't report on any legal cases, you mustn't report on any legal cases involving the Metropolitan Police? Did that ever arise in conversation ever, please?
I don't think so, not specifically. I remember being reminded that we could never mislead a court on one occasion, but I can't remember in what context that was.
When you were advised that you shouldn't mislead a court, from your earlier evidence that you never practically had to action that advice, but what was your understanding of not misleading a court? Was it to give your false name?
Yes.
Nevertheless?
Yes. Well, in the context of there was I became aware, or we became aware, it may even have been something that was discussed at a Thursday meeting, that in the past, I think somebody had been asked to give a witness statement regarding, I think it was a hunt sab job, a field where someone had been drawn into a situation where either they had been arrested or had been asked to provide a witness statement on behalf of the person who was arrested. And
was this Jim Boyling, HN14?
yeah, it might have been.
What do you recall of that, please, from your perspective?
I can just recall. I can just recall it being a subject. It wasn't sort of one of the big topics in a meeting. I can't remember how it came up, but I think it may not even have been a whole meeting group. It might have just been a sort of subfield where we would sit and chat briefly amongst what was going on after the main meeting, and it came up somehow, sort of tangentially.
Was Jim Boyling there during that meeting?
No, he would have been long gone, but it was sort of remembering back to something that he'd been involved in. And I think one of the covers was in the room at the time, and he was just literally sort of put his finger in the air and just sort of said something along the lines of, look, if this ever happens, you cannot mislead a court. You can't, get involved in that.
And the example given was Jim Boyling,
yes,
what happened to him.
That's correct.
Did anyone ask any follow-up questions in relation to that?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Were you ever given any particular direction about reporting on politicians, members of Parliament at all?
No, I don't believe so.
What was your approach to your reporting that mentioned politicians? Did you have any particular concerns over mentioning politicians in your reporting, or was that something that did not ever cross your mind at all?
No, I don't think it figured in my thinking, quite frankly. If I'd been at a meeting or an event and a politician had spoken, I'm sure I would have recorded the fact that they were there and had given a speech or whatever. I wouldn't have felt it necessary to exclude that.
Do you ever recall at any time your managers mentioning reporting that mentioned politicians at all?
No.
Were you ever concerned in your reporting that you referred from time to time to elected politicians? Is that something that you were concerned about at all?
No, it wasn't.
I just want to give a few examples. I wonder if we could just turn up MPS 0029410, please. So this is at tab C268 in volume 6. It's one of your reports dated the 20th of October 2003. I wonder if we could please turn to page 6. And it's the second report here. Stop the War Coalition, protests surrounding the forthcoming visit of US President George Bush. Andrew Bergin from the steering committee of the Stop the War Coalition is apparently in touch with the Mayor of London's office about the forthcoming visit of US President George Bush. Mayor Livingston is reportedly sympathetic to those planning to protest the visit and has offered to host an alternate peace conference during the time that Bush will be in the UK. Several other activist groups, including Justice Not Vengeance and Voices in the Wilderness, plan to approach the Mayor to ask for more practical assistance, such as accommodation space for any activists that may arrive in London after the European Social Forum. Did you consider it, or if someone were to observe that it's inappropriate to report about contact with the Mayor of London's office about a peace conference, what's your response to that? That this is not something that is appropriate for an undercover SDS officer to report on?
I suppose I would say that, again, it's just information that's coming in and might enrich or deepen the understanding of what was going to go on at that time. And it was just, very much that was a type of information that seemingly was required. And I never had any pushback, if that makes sense. No one ever said, hey, we don't need to know that. If they had, I'd have said, fine, absolutely, not a problem,
If we could take that down and move to MPS 003-1971, please. This is at tab C289. In volume 6. And so we have here the last report on that first page. The last paragraph refers to Ken Livingstone, London Mayor, also gave a passionate speech where he called upon activists to oppose the BNP by any means possible and pledged that he would do all he could to ensure that activists were not prevented from demonstrating on London streets. Would you give the same answer, that this was the type of information that was, your word, required?
Yes.
Required by whom? Who considered that information helpful, for example, here about Ken Livingstone?
I think it is just part of, that packet of information, if you like, that was going up. It was the sort of thing that, I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's it was the type of thing that C Squad seemed to want, and that was, that was reflected in the sort of feedback we received, such as it was, and it informed. That was literally part of the sort of information that they seemed to want to receive.
Can we take that down, please, and move to MPS 002-9410? This is at tab C268 in volume 6. I wonder if we can go, please, to page 3 of 29410. If we can go to page 3 of that. Thank you. So if we look at the last two reports there, so Stop the War, protests surrounding the forthcoming visit of US President Bush. The Stop the War Coalition are organising a raft of protests and actions in response to the planned visit of US President George Bush. The coalition is planning a big public rally for the evening of Tuesday the 18th of November at the Friends Meeting House on the Euston Road. Speakers confirmed thus include Ron Kovich, Tony Benn and almost inevitably George Galloway. And again, the same answer previously, that references Tony Benn, George Galloway. Your understanding was this is the sort of information that the people that read your reports were interested in.
Yes.
And if we can just zoom out of that and just look at the report that follows, please. Similar report, and it says they are hoping to hold a mock trial of George Bush. Bob Andrews, MP, is reportedly willing to take part, and several other high-profile lawyers have been invited to participate. So again, in relation to that, looking back now, if someone were to make the point that it was unusual or inappropriate for undercover police officers to report on MPs being willing to take part in speeches, events. What would your response be to that, looking back on it now?
Yeah, I suppose in the cold light of day, I wouldn't disagree necessarily.
If we can take that down, please. Could we turn up MPS 008909? It's at tab C117. Which is in volume 5. Globalised Resistance has become aware of the fact that John Prescott, the Deputy Prime Minister, is due to host a party at the Royal Lancaster Hall on Wednesday the 29th of May to celebrate the success of various PFIs. This news has not been well received, especially in the light of the recent Potters Bar rail disaster, and is now likely that GR will organise a protest at the event. Details of the event will now feature in the weekly Globalised email message, and depending on how much support Taylor gives it, the event has the potential to attract a number of protesters. At this point in time, Taylor is of the opinion that this is exactly the sort of event that GR should cover. Now, would you accept that this is, of course, mentioning a politician, John Prescott, the then Deputy Prime Minister? It's a different context, because this is in relation to a potential demonstration or action that might affect John Prescott, as opposed to, for example, John Prescott supporting something or giving a speech. So in relation to this sort of intelligence, were you aware of where that intelligence was disseminated to? In other words, were you aware that when you were reporting about a potential action involving John Prescott, that he or the support team around him would be alerted as a result of your intelligence?
Yes, I think so.
And would you accept that there's a distinction between referring to a politician in this context compared to some of the examples that we were looking at earlier?
Yes, I would.
I wonder if we can take that down, please. Please could we turn up MPS 008247? This is in tab C73. It's in volume 4. It's one of your reports of the 26th of February 2002. Now, in relation to this document, I wonder if we can look to the right at the. We can see your reporting in your Groundhog Day days, right at the bottom. Privacy, it is also being mooted as a possibility for being the Socialist Alliance candidate in the upcoming May by-elections for the Peckham ward that contains the Peckham Rye estate. And if we can just go into the next page, please. And then Privacy owns a mobile number, Privacy. So in terms of the end of this report, again, with the looking back on your reporting, would you agree if someone suggested that reporting about someone being considered as a candidate 118, you were just talking about your commendation, and I wonder if we can turn to HM 118's statement, please, page 90. Senior management and oversight bodies, and you state and set out here that while I am told that AXO visited the SDS in 2001, I do not recall any senior managers visiting the SDS during my time as UCO. Now, in relation to your deployment from July 2001 to December 2007, so from that period, you don't recall any senior managers visiting the SDS?
No, not at all. I think I might have missed one because I was away. But
is that something that, looking back, you're surprised on, or not because it's a secret unit? What are your thoughts in relation to that?
No, I'm not particularly surprised. I understand it happened a bit more often in the past, but
the next paragraph, please, where you state, I received an Assistant Commissioner's commendation for my role in Operation Caprice. This was the intelligence operation around the visit of President George W. Bush in November 2003. Despite my output thereafter, it was not in the interest of those who wanted to shut the SDS down for any of us to be seen to have done a good job. So I was not recommended for any further commendations, notwithstanding the extended periods away from my family, covering events and the contributions that I made. Now, if we just, the first part, your commendation that you were provided in relation to your role in Operation Caprice, what was it about what you did as an undercover officer that warranted a commendation in 2003?
I'm not sure how to answer that, really. I think that it was just, obviously you don't put in for a commendation yourself. It's not something you sort of prop your head up above the parapet and say, hey, I think I'm due this, or whatever. But it was, you'd have to ask the people who, put me up for it. It was probably just about the quantity and the way that we were able to understand the likely nature of the protests and the amount of people. I think perhaps, I don't know, the main protest, as I recall, for the visit of Bush was midweek, and they were originally putting a very low figure on the number of protesters that were expected to turn up. And I can recall being in a meeting with a couple of the cover officers and them quoting some figures that had come through, and it was our opinion we need to revise it by a factor of 10, really, and perhaps that, I don't know.
In terms of the reference to Assistant Commissioner's commendation, could you just give us an idea of how significant, how valued such a commendation was amongst the group of undercover officers that were your colleagues? Was this seen as something very valuable, something that was deserved, something to aim for, or how was it treated, such commendations?
I suppose they were welcome. I mean, they don't, in my mind, it's not particularly significant at all. I couldn't tell you where my commendation is now. I've got no clue. But I think some people considered them more valuable than others. I'm not trying to be mealy-mouthed about it. I don't think they were particularly significant. They wouldn't affect your career going forwards, if that made sense. It wouldn't put you in a stronger position to apply for other postings or positions.
Reading that second part of that paragraph that we've just looked at, despite my output thereafter, it was not in the interests of those who wanted to shut the SDS down for any of us to be seen to have done a good job. And so the suggestion there, is this right, that you felt that you deserved another commendation, but for political reasons within the SDS?
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't think I deserved I think this slightly odd sentence is in my statement, is is in direct response to a question being posed by the inquiry. It's one of those, because it used to be the case that it was almost a standard thing that you would get accommodation at the end of your SDS deployment. So I suspect that's why it has been mentioned in that way.
Do you consider that the second part of your deployment warranted accommodation, looking back on it?
No.
No. I'm going to, if we can take that down, please. I want to ask you about some just individual specific topics. And the first of those is in relation to Fairford coaches in March 2003. Now, do you recall this ever coming up as a topic in the SDS offices, the stopping of the Fairford coaches? Did that ever arise at all?
This is where the coaches were turned around? And
this is where the coaches were stopped, illegally turned back to London. Do you recall at the time any discussion or talk about this, either other UCOs or managers?
Only really peripherally. It's certainly it's certainly a situation that I heard mentioned, but I wasn't ever part of any. It didn't affect me, if that makes sense. So it wasn't something that I believe I had any impact in. So it was. I remember it being raised in direct connection with a UCO who was out at the time, and I think him getting pulled into a couple of little mini meetings when we had our regular Thursday meeting, but they would disappear into another.
Was that HN3? Take your time, have a look at the list that
Yes, it was.
Right. So what do you recall about anything to do with Fairford coaches and HN3? You mentioned in broad terms he was pulled into a few meetings, but could you please provide us with as much detail, context that you can recall about this, please?
Literally only that it was clearly a thing. There was a situation ongoing, and that it involved HN3. To what degree, I couldn't tell you, but that it was for a while something that was being discussed. Where we used to meet, there were other little rooms, and he's clearly getting pulled into a 10, 15-minute discussion, which apparently was about that.
But how do you know? You say apparently it was about that, but how, a number of years ago, but how do you know it was about Fairford coaches?
I think I probably asked him. If you were in that environment and one of you got a bit of a tug, and we need to disappear in a little room for 10 or 15 minutes and discuss something like that, it'd be quite natural if you were still hanging around over a cup of tea just to say, oh, what was that about? Not much more than that, really.
Was that quite a normal thing to do, to ask your colleagues about details about their deployment? Was it a something that was often discussed, or what's happening with your deployment, or the opposite? It was a no-go zone, never asked your colleagues about what they're doing?
No, it definitely wasn't a no-go zone, but you were already trying to hold a lot of information in your head, and sometimes it could be hazardous to know things you couldn't have known, if that makes sense. So you'd guard against that. But
so am I overstating what you're describing? So you're at the SDS meeting, you're aware that HN3 gets pulled into another room for about 15 minutes. Afterwards, you then say words to the effect, well, what was that all about?
Yeah.
And then he said something to you that related to Fairford coaches.
Yeah, I think probably saying, oh, it's a thing about the coaches or whatever, and, you don't want to know about it. At which point I would have the sense to say, okie doke, have a cup of tea.
Did he say you don't want to know about it? Or just pause and just think in terms of what HN3 said? So he comes out of the room, and sometime later you then ask him what that's all about. So just take us back to what he said to you that you can recall.
I can't recall he said very much about it at all, and I'm not trying to be mealy-mouthed about it. It's I think it was a topic that was clearly sort of not one for conversation, and that wasn't that uncommon, to sort of say, you don't need to know the thing, and you don't need to know. So, understood.
But he and you remember after all this time that although he didn't provide detail, it was in relation to something to do with Fairford coaches.
Yes.
All right. It's a particular report at the end of Guy Taylor's evidence last week, he questioned one of your reports and flagged up one of your reports, and I just want to ask you about it, please. It is MPS 002-9367, which is at tab C267 in volume 6. I wonder if you can go to page 2. Now the top report there, so this is again back in the globalised resistance reporting era. So Privacy is an activist with Globalised Resistance, the London-based anti-capitalist group. She has recently returned to London and is believed to be living at, and the address is redacted, a residential street just to the southeast of the Tibbets Corner roundabout on the A3. While she recently also gave her address as address 2, it is believed that that was a last-second effort to disguise her true address. It is known that she routinely travels home from central London via a mainline train to Putney, and then a single onward journey by bus. This would seem to suggest that address 1 is the likely true address. Now, in terms of that information, what would you say to the observation that this is a description of a woman travelling home to her home address, and the only way of reporting that is if you followed her home? What would you say to that suggestion?
No, well, I certainly didn't follow her home. I mean, you'll be aware just from those locations that this was very close to where my last colour accommodation address was. I know who this is about, and we lived quite close to each other, and I can only imagine it came up in conversation about commuting back from town. I absolutely did not follow, anybody at any time home to a home address.
May I move to another topic, and this is in relation to references in some of the reporting to children. May I ask, please, that MPS 0526933, please, is put on screen. It is at tab B89, which is in volume 3. Now, if we turn to the next page, we can see this. We've looked at this before. This is the authorization docket, so it contains very many pages of your various authorizations. I'm going to, in fact, ask if we can go all the way, please, to page 66. Now, if we can see a number of bullet points, or if we can just expand those, please. And I want to count down one to the... Yes, thank you. Now, 5 bullet points up from the bottom of that image that we can see there. And this is under the heading, really, some of RW's more significant reporting was as follows. And here it says, the use of children and the elderly to lead walkouts in the hope that this would make the police hesitant and could have potentially led to severe embarrassment. And so if it was said that the suggestion that children or indeed the elderly were being used by groups that you were spying upon was not the case, and that those groups would not use children in this way, what would your response be to that? Because here is set out, some of your more significant reporting refers to the use of children to lead walkouts. The response that was not the case, that children were not used in such a cynical way, and that is a misrepresentation of the care and the welfare that was delivered to children by the activists you spied on. What was your reaction to that, please?
Yeah, I've got no recollection of ever reporting on that, and obviously these aren't my words. This is someone's summary of my reporting. But if I had, and I can't recall a single incident where I had ever seen that happen. But if it had, I would have reported it, because public order policing would need to know that there were children and the elderly around. But I don't recall it at all. And it would be a cynical tactic, and I've never heard of it.
If we look a couple of bullet points down, the marking out of the proposed third runway, which was again to be led by the 100 children on camp. Does that ring any bells in terms of information that you provided?
That does actually ring a bell. I think that was possibly one of the proposed, and anybody can propose anything at any time. But I think there was talk of that being an action which could happen. If there had been some form of action proposed where you were going to have 100 children, marking out the third runway, then it would be useful for policing to know that. In the context of the fact that would be policed very differently than, 100 adults.
So I wonder if we could call up MPS 007 5721. So 007 5721. So just take time to glance at that. So is that your reporting? Activists consider that the likelihood of successful mass walkout on Sunday to be slim. It is likely that a smaller walkout comprising children and elderly will be all. There are about 100 children under 7 years at the camp. It appears to cover similar topics to the document that we were looking at.
Yeah.
Is this...
I've got a vague memory that I'm being as honest, or not honest, I'm being as comprehensive as I can be, and trying to remember exactly. Now I've seen this, I've got a half memory that actually I received whilst I was there. Someone said, could you give us a rough estimate of the number of children in the camp? So perhaps that's come from me when I was there.
And so is that the case that a number of the points that you make in reporting, for example, such as this, a direct response to specific questions that were put to you, for example, such as numbers?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Sort of thing? Whilst we have this climate camp report up, can I just briefly return to that topic? Because we were talking earlier about legal observers in relation to climate camp, and I just want to go back to that subject. When I was describing legal observers, and I was asking you, the people there, just to record what happened, but if it was said that, well, legal observers are there specifically in relation to being witnesses for potential civil proceedings against police, possibility of false arrests and witnessing those proceedings, again, would you agree that that is what they were doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if it was said that it was inappropriate for an undercover police officer to report about legal observers who were there to record details about civil matters involving the police?
I think I would only report on that if I thought that it was going to answer a specific question or just inform the understanding of what was happening out on the ground at that time.
Would you agree that the last people to cause any public order issues would have been the legal observers?
100%.
And so what was the request then for reporting on that? Because we're talking about, specific questions. You said, well, I would have been asked about that. Could you provide us a bit more detail about that? What sort of questions were you asked about legal observers that you can recall?
I don't recall ever being asked a specific question about a legal observer.
In relation to Climate Camp, before we move away from this report and this subject, was there any political input that you recall when you were undercover at the Climate Camp event in 2007 regarding Heathrow? So I think that in terms of any perceived risk from, for example, government ministers, was it ever said to you, well, because you described earlier, well, you're very reluctant coming to the end of your deployment, it's really not something that you wanted to get involved in. You were specifically asked by Frankie Flood, no, you go there, you must do that. But was it ever said to you that there was ministerial interest in that particular event, the risks to Heathrow Airport? Did that ever feature?
I don't recall any, no.
Right. Specific topic of subversion. Now, you refer to this at page 73 of your statement. So I wonder if you can take this document down. In relation to your deployment as a whole, would you agree that in terms of your main concern was relating to public order?
Yes.
And was not focused on, for example, violence?
Not particularly, no.
And in terms of subversion, because here, paragraph 195, you say, as my pre-SDS MPSB career was in, you refer to the squads, I lacked anything but a broad understanding of the branch's role in countering subversive activity. I knew that the SWP maintained its traditional revolutionary aims, and as a spin-off from that, GR could be said to be subversive. The activity was focused on public order, however, rather than directly towards subversion. And so in terms of the justification, what you are bearing in mind when you're conducting your undercover work, would it be correct to say that subversion didn't feature in your thought process?
Yes, it would.
And in terms of the groups that you reported on, would they, in your opinion, have met the definition of subversion? If we use, for example, as referred to quite often, the Harris definition, activities threatening the safety or well-being of the state and intended to undermine or overthrow parliamentary democracy by political, industrial or violent means, the groups that you infiltrated, would you accept were not subversive?
No, not in the main. I mean, it's literally in the SWP's mission statement, isn't it? But it wasn't something that featured in my thinking or day-to-day activity at all.
Now, I want to ask about the deployment of some of your contemporaries. Now, were you particularly close to HN 104, Carlo Soraki?
Yes, I knew Carlo very well. We had worked together for a number of years before he went off to SDS.
When he was deployed into the SDS, how close were you then?
We were still close in so much as we both worked on the same unit and we would see each other twice a week.
So his deployment, 2000 to 2006, you are 1 year further on than that, 2001 to 2007. So a significant overlap of your deployments. Would you have regarded him as a friend?
Yes.
Did you socialise with him during the period of your deployment when you overlap for that 5 years or so, would you socialise with him?
In the real world?
In the real world, yes.
No.
You asked in the real world, and your answer is no. Well, all right. As an undercover officer, did you socialise with him?
Well, not when I was out doing my undercover role. I suppose the distinction is I can recall a handful of times, in fact probably not even a handful, 3 or 4 times you were able to go for a pint after a meeting. So you were actually, meeting at one of the locations where we had our regular meetings, and it was possible to slink off and get a beer together. But that was pretty rare, quite frankly. And you could only do that because we were deployed in broadly similar fields. So suddenly someone had come in from your organisation, it wouldn't look out of character. I wouldn't be drinking with somebody that I wouldn't normally expect to share a beer with.
Just to be clear, at the time, if during your deployment, if someone had asked you about Carlo Siraki and someone asked, is he a friend of yours, you would have said yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, a good friend?
Yes.
So could you help us with the sense to which he was a good friend? Because what you've described so far is maybe once or very rarely meeting with him. So why would he be a very good friend if you're not meeting up with him?
Well, because during this period, spare time was rare, and if you had the opportunity to have a whole evening at home or a day doing something else, I would want to get home and spend time with my wife and children.
So was the friendship more in terms of your interaction when you attended, say, for the meetings, the regular meetings, and your interaction with him then?
Yes.
You are aware now that when he was deployed, that he engaged in sexual relationships, yes?
Yes, I am.
Now, given your description of him as a friend of yours, were you aware that he was doing this at the time?
No.
Do you ever recall him talking about relationships with activists?
No. And I wouldn't expect him to. It wasn't the sort of thing that you were advertised, I would think. If you were doing that, I don't think you'd be, broadcasting it to all and sundry when you were at meetings. It's just not. I just don't see why he would do that, or anybody else for that matter.
When did you first find out that he had engaged in sexual relationships?
When all this started to come out in the media, when the revelations, I first learned about it when I read it online, as part of general mainstream media reporting.
Could you help us with the SDS social events? How often would there be a social event in the SDS, please?
An organised social event?
Both types.
Yeah, very rarely, actually. I can recall, there wasn't a Christmas party or anything like that. There was never once a social event where partners were invited during my time.
Pausing there, so your evidence is that from when you joined in 2001 to the end of the SDS, that you weren't aware of any social events where partners were invited?
No.
Do you remember any social events, any team building events that could come under that category?
Yeah, I can remember, I think it was fairly early on in my deployment, there was a leaving do or trip for somebody. I can't remember who it was. It might even have been someone who was formerly on the unit. But I remember we had a sort of outward bound almost thing. It was a canoeing trip on a river. I don't even know, South Wales, down in the southwest, somewhere like that, where we drove down, spent a long day paddling up a river, and then there was a barbecue and some beers, and overnight in a bunkhouse.
Were you the leaving drinks that you're referring to? Was that the leaving drinks for Ron Gilbertson?
It might have been, yes.
What do you recall of that occasion?
What I've told you, really. I can remember driving down, meeting up with others from the unit. It was, as I said, it was paddling up a river or downstream on a river in canoes and that sort of thing. Quite a long trip, and then being picked up at the other end, I think, and then returned to like a little mini outward bound centre, if that makes sense, with sort of wood cabins. And I think that we were, we're all in bunk beds, and I think split between two huts or whatever. There was a barbecue, and some beers, and it was
an opportunity to let off steam.
Yeah, a little bit, absolutely.
You've already alluded to yesterday the strains that you were under as an undercover officer. Presumably other UCOs were also under some strain as well. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah.
And in events such as the one you're describing, particularly after drinks, did the conversation not turn to particular issues that UCOs were experiencing or particularly interesting parts of their deployment?
Not that I recall, not very often. It was almost, someone would say, not work, not work. It was an opportunity to sort of live in the real world and actually not talk about that type of stuff. I think people enjoyed that freedom. It was a rare opportunity not to be thinking about those sorts of things.
Do you not recall at once the subject of relationships arising at all during not just this particular away day, but just at any other time with the undercover officers who were your colleagues? Did it never arise once during all those years of your deployment as a topic?
Over and above what we talked about yesterday with regard to James, I don't. Oh, and with the Australia-New Zealand situation we spoke about.
So aside from, you described yesterday James Thompson passport, and the suggestion was a relationship was involved, and you mentioned yesterday in terms of John Dines and Helen Steele. Apart from those two examples, over the years of your deployment, was there no mention of it a topic in passing or raised as a joke or raised as a particular concern? Not at all.
Not really. I mean, over and above, there was some discussion about it after the Mike Dell's meeting that we spoke about yesterday, where he gave very clear direction about it. I think there was some natural conversation about it afterwards. But no, it wasn't something that came up.
And because, going back to that, the way in which you described it was very out of character for Mike Dell to stand up in a meeting and to lay down the law in that way. Did that not come up again in later conversations, maybe drinks with colleagues or even with Mike Dell himself, going back to that as a topic for discussions? Remember that time you mentioned that? What was that all about? And asking for more details. Did that not arise?
It would seem natural enough, wouldn't it? No, I don't think it did. I think people were carrying quite a lot of information, and I'm living this life and that life, and it just wasn't something that was discussed. I think people were quite compartmentalised about what they were doing, and it just didn't come up.
So I don't know whether that is a convenient moment for our mid-afternoon break.
Of course. 10 minutes long enough? 10 minutes. scramble.
HN 118, you were explaining, apart from those two exceptions, that at the time that you were deployed as an undercover officer in the SDS, you were not aware contemporaneously of UCOs having inappropriate relationships.
Yes, that's right.
And even though you were a friend of Carlo Soraki, nevertheless, you didn't have any inkling of that.
No, none whatsoever.
In relation to Mr. Soraki, did you notice any decline or any change in his mental state at all? Because you described yesterday how it had an effect on you, but did you observe that specifically in Carlo Soraki in any way?
I mean, it would ebb and flow, I think. At times he seemed quite tight, quite anxious is the wrong word. He seemed quite occasionally preoccupied, not as sort of expressive and sociable, just relaxed as he normally would. But that wasn't uncommon, if that makes sense, between...
As a friend, in those circumstances, you notice he's under high stress or there's something not right. Would that not have prompted you to take him to one side and say, well, are you right? Is there anything up? What's going on in your deployment? Anything like that? Would you have asked those sorts of questions of a friend?
I'm sure I did. I certainly asked him, how you doing? What's going on or whatever. And I can recall a couple of occasions when he indicated things weren't going particularly well at home between him and his wife.
He said that?
Yeah, but in general terms, that things were a little bit bumpy.
Can you help us in terms of that in particular? So, again, mentioned his deployment overlapped significantly with yours, 2000 to 2006. Are you able to help, perhaps using as a marker when you began your deployment, when he first mentioned problems at home in the way you've just described? Was that early on, towards the end? Please have a think about the timing.
I think a couple of years in for me, so I would have been out for a couple of years or so. I recall that he went through a bit of a period. I'm not sure, but it certainly after a couple of years or so, after I had been launched and gone out, so it would have been 2003, something like that, that he, I think, had mentioned it a couple of times.
Now, when you say mentioned it, is this a one sentence and then no further conversation, or was it a much longer conversation?
No, a very short conversation, really. I mean, it was most of the time you were in one room, with lots of people in there, and it was quite difficult to talk, in private, if that makes sense. So it wouldn't have been something that would have been discussed, and he would, and he would sort of on occasion just sort of nip off that conversation a bit. It wasn't.
Did he raise it in one of those meetings where other UCOs were?
No. It would have been afterwards. It would have been after the meeting had taken place, and they would sort of break up. People didn't all go out the door at the same time because that would have looked very strange. So it was. We used to sort of leave in dribs and drabs and by group, if that makes sense.
And would any of the managers have been aware of that from what you saw of conversations and things that he said? Would the managers have been aware that he had problems at home, essentially?
I don't know. I can't say. I'm not sure.
So, referred to as the field daddy, being there for a long time. Did you feel any sort of responsibility when you saw a colleague and someone who hadn't been there as long as you to ask them about their welfare, about how they are, and sort of to take control in relation to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, by the time I had assumed that role, Carlo would have been long gone. But I certainly did, and spent a lot of my time in the last year or so fielding, inquiries from the younger members of the unit that were being brought on board, especially because in the last 18 months or so, it was the units, it was kind of accepted that the unit was going to fold, and it was a constant source of conversation because people were still in their pre-deployment phases and were preparing their legends and were about to launch, or we were still, or the unit tentatively, rather half-heartedly, was still recruiting. So new people were coming in and then immediately kind of realising, well, hold on a minute, this whole thing seems to be in jeopardy, and is it actually...
Specifically in terms of what you said to other UCOs on the topic of welfare, can you remember any particular instances where you discussed with a UCO an issue in relation to their welfare in respect, for example, let's say they were struggling or clearly upset or unhappy or stressed about something? Is that something that you did in that role, that you sort of take them to one side, ask them if they were all right? Was that your role?
It wasn't my role, in any official capacity, but yeah, absolutely. I would, if someone was obviously upset or anxious or something, I would definitely have a cup of tea with them and, try and give them the benefit of some advice around it.
And was that advice, was the distress ever about anything to do with relationships at all?
No, not that I recall.
What sort of thing was it about then?
In the main, especially towards the end, it was just the constant uncertainty about the way forward. It was there was a huge amount of inconsistency about whether SDS was going to continue. It changed from week to week. One week it would be absolutely, we're going forward, because this came in the wake of the amalgamation between Special Branch and the Anti-Terrorist Branch into the Unified Command. Brand new management team came in. And, I think for most of us who've been there a bit longer, it was clear the writing was on the wall almost immediately that the unit was going to fold. It was just a question of when.
In going back to your contemporaries, apart from, you've already talked about HN14 Jim Boyling, the passport issue and what happened there. During your deployment, can you recall any of your colleagues doing anything inappropriate or being pulled up for any inappropriate conduct in any way?
I don't think so, no.
What was the level of, in terms of these meetings? Of course, these are secret meetings, all of you meeting up weekly. And what was the tone of those meetings? When you were meeting with your contemporaries, and how professional were those meetings? Given essentially they're behind closed doors, was there banter? Was it very serious? How would you describe what happened in those meeting rooms from the perspective of the tone that people were using?
It varied. I think some people were more relaxed than others, but it was a relatively informal atmosphere. But it was, you were there. It was businesslike, and you were there to have the meeting, get your admin sorted, meet with your cover, get back out the door. I wouldn't say there was particularly jovial or.
Now, not an SDS weekly meeting, but we were looking at previously, I put a document up on screen, it was a desk meeting, and one of the topics listed was Helen Steele. Now, I want to ask about the meetings, the weekly meetings with your colleagues. Were individual activists referred to during those meetings? So, for example, would you get the same names coming up again and again?
Yeah, absolutely you would.
And so, to use that example, Helen Steele?
Yes. Well, Helen Steele in the context of the incident we spoke about yesterday, where it became apparent that there was a situation with her looking for a former UCO.
Leaving aside that particular context, was there ever discussion about specific activists in a derogatory tone, for example? Would someone refer to a particular activist in a derogatory way, in a negative way?
Not that I can recall. No, I mean,
how did you and your colleagues refer to those that you're reporting on in these meetings? Was it
Quite often by their initials, or some people were so commonplace that people would be able to just mention their first name and you would know who they were speaking about.
And was there a mixture of attitudes by you and your colleagues towards those that you spied upon? For example, did you hold some in high regard, some in low regard? Did you make fun of some? Did you praise others? Could you help us with what was discussed between you and your colleagues about individual activists? And again, under the heading of the tone in which they were referred to, please.
Yeah, I mean, it was, people were certainly referred to, and you'd sort of roll your eyes occasionally, but it was, most of the time, it was fairly innocuous, and it was just, someone would say something, you'd start talking about someone being, when you talk about banter or whatever, that sort of thing, if someone, when I was there in the early days, if I was there ready to go and my notebook out, someone would say, the Trots are here, former Vanguard, or something like that. And it was that kind of thing. It was.
Okay. I want to ask you about something you've set out in your statement, please. And I wonder if we can bring that up on screen. If we can begin by looking at page 65, please. Here you say, I was aware of Mark Kennedy because he was also involved in groups that were part of the Dissent network. And whenever I saw him, he always seemed to have the newest and most expensive clothing and specialist equipment, including climbing gear. I was aware that he was a police officer and clearly had been deployed as a non-SDS UCO. And because of this and his propensity to attract attention, I stayed well away from him. From the earliest occasion, I deliberately made sure that all my clothing was well worn, as were the sleeping bags and other equipment that I used when I was at convergence centres around the UK and Europe. In my view, new high-quality equipment like that was a key indicator of a commercial chiz or a journalist. It meant that I was often uncomfortable while I was away, but it was preferable to drawing too much attention to myself in the wrong way. And if we go to the next paragraph, please. As I kept a distance between myself and Mark Kennedy, I only became aware of the allegations against him in respect of sexual relationships in his undercover identity and his role in relation to a proposed action at the Ratcliffe-on-Soar power station when or shortly before these were published. I am not sure that I was aware of any allegation that he provided information to private companies until I read my Rule 9 request. Now, earlier today, when I was asking about your knowledge of any UCOs in the NPOIU, Mark Kennedy was one of those.
Yes.
Was the officer with undercover name Marco Jacobs another of those?
Yes.
Could we please turn to page 94 in your statement, please? It's paragraph 256. While he was not an SDS UCO, and again, the same topic, I encountered the NPOIU UCO Mark Kennedy during my deployment. In addition to what I've said at paragraphs 177 to 178 above, you were just looking at, I tried to keep a safe distance from him because I was concerned about his behaviour and the amount of new clothing and equipment he always seemed to have. It is no surprise that those he associated with nicknamed him Flash. I raised concerns about him with my cover officer at the latest after the first preparatory camp in Germany ahead of the G8 conference in Heiligendamm. These concerns included the possibility that his behaviour had crossed the line into organising and encouraging those he associated with to commit criminal offences. I do not know what happened following this. As far as I am aware, none of my contemporaries in the SDS crossed this line. Is that your evidence that as far as your SDS contemporaries are concerned, they didn't cross the line, but you were concerned that Mark Kennedy did?
Yes.
In relation to the managers that you had, one of those being HN72, could you help me with how close you were to HN72 as a manager?
Yeah, not particularly close. I had worked on a team beforehand that he had some involvement with, so I knew him, as knocking about the floor at the yard, but I didn't know him well at all.
How would you have described him as a manager? What was he like?
Yeah, he was relatively laid back, quite competent. Always seemed on top of the work he had in front of him. He was passionate about the SDS. When he came to us, he really wanted the unit to keep going.
Did you tell him at one of the Monday meetings that you thought that Mark Kennedy and Marco Jacobs were in intimate relationships with activists?
No. I certainly raised concerns, or I can remember, forgive me, I can remember HN72 raising the issue of both of those officers, but not in the context of sexual relationships. We spoke after the German G8.
Well, just to be clear, I'm going to ask if this paragraph, please, could be put up on screen. It's the paragraph 361 from HN72's witness statement, please. Could we please put up paragraph 361? Now, this is a paragraph from HN72's witness statement. I'm just going to read it to you and then I'm just going to ask you questions about it. Sexual relations did come up when HN118 came across NPOIU officers Mark Kennedy and Marco at the G8 in June 2007. HN118 reported back at one of our Monday meetings that he thought that they were in intimate relationships with women. As a result, DCI Flood was going to review Mark Kennedy and Marco's operations with the NPOIU. The outcome was that from the summer of 2007, SO15 Commander John McDowell would have oversight of all the NPOIU UCO authorisations. Now, can you just help us with what is not accurate in relation to what HN72 has set out in this paragraph, please?
Yeah, absolutely. He definitely asked me about both Mark Kennedy and Marco after the G8 in Germany. In fact, he asked me. I'm trying to remember the conversation. I think he asked my opinion on whether they might be, whether it was possible either of them were in sexual relationships with women. And I remember opining straight away that I thought it was entirely out of character for what I knew of my limited interaction with Marco. I didn't know him particularly well at all, but nothing in his behaviour or what I had seen or witnessed out, when our paths would cross very briefly out on the ground at demos, actions, marches, whatever it was, there. I thought it was, I remember saying it was incredibly unlikely. I think I posited that in the case of Mark Kennedy that it was much more likely. He asked me if I'd ever seen him in company with a woman.
No names, please.
No, of course. And I said that, yeah, I had quite frequently. And in fact, it was the same woman each time. But I'd never seen them, in an obviously intimate setting. Their body, their body language, I'd never seen him holding hands or with his arm around her or anything like that. I had seen them travelling in the same vehicle, I think, a number of times. I think when they arrived for the Kempinski preparatory camp in Germany about a year before the G8, I can recall quite clearly him arriving at the camp. I'd already been there a couple of days, I think.
Again, not mentioning any names out loud, but do you remember the name of the woman that you've just described that you saw Mark Kennedy with?
Yes, I remember her first name.
Could you please write down on a piece of paper the name?
Of course. Sorry, you won't be able to read that. Thank you. I think that's right. If you could show me a picture, I'll better answer straight away.
What is set out here then is, on your evidence, inaccurate. So when it says HN 118 reported back at one of our Monday meetings that he thought that they were in intimate relationships with women, just to be clear about your evidence, as far as Marco's concerned, Marco Jacobs, your thoughts were the opposite. That is what you said to HN 72. Your evidence, just to be clear, is that as far as Marco was concerned, it was incredibly unlikely and out of character.
Yes, and I would, to make the distinction, if you'd asked me about Marco, I'd have said I'd be very surprised. If you'd asked me about Mark Kennedy, I wouldn't have been surprised at all.
The name that you have provided and written down, is this a name that you gave to HN 72 at this Monday meeting that he's...
Yes, I think it was.
Now, he states in his statement that as a result, DCI Flood was going to review those two operations with the NPIU. Is that something that HN 72 communicated to you after you gave your opinion about those two officers' involvement in relationships?
I don't think so, but I forgive me, I'm not quite sure of the chronology, but I certainly spoke to Frankie about the fact that I can remember conversations with Frankie about Mark Kennedy, and he was going to bring him in and sort of have an interview with him. I'm not sure if it was here or whether it may have been even earlier.
Just Mark Kennedy, and to be clear, not Marco Jacobs.
Yeah, that's correct.
In terms of discussions with your colleagues, do you remember a time when there was talk about the True Lies documentary as a topic of conversation, True Spies? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
So, broadcast in October, November 2002. Could you just help us with the discussion that you and your colleagues had when that came out, please, and the significance of it?
Yes, of course. I think it was the first, I may be wrong, but I think it was the very first sort of revelations about the unit that came out from memory. I think this was the sort of, the first breaking of the seal, if that makes sense, about the unit existing. But people were, my memory of it is that several people had cooperated with the television programme and had appeared as sort of talking heads and discussed various things about the unit. So it was a big deal. It was quite shocking. People felt anxious, upset, betrayed in a way that it had happened.
What discussion was there in the SDS office about Peter Francis that you can recall during your time?
There was chatter about him every now and again in various contexts about the fact that I can't remember at the time when this was coming out. He was, it was just a sort of big conversation about him tended to concentrate on a big griefy situation, but I didn't have a huge amount of detail about what happened, if that makes sense.
Litigation against the Metropolitan Police, was that something that was discussed?
I think it was, yeah. I think there was talk about the fact that he was taking some form of legal action.
What was there a feeling of betrayal within the SDS that was taking place, or not?
I think less so than the TV programme, but I certainly wasn't cited on exactly what was going on and what the nature of that was. So I think that there was, talk that he'd been struggling with his mental health a bit, and that it was some of his the information that was coming out was a little bit erratic and off the wall. But
and in terms of the managers, can you remember any discussion with your managers about Peter Francis at all and their attitude towards him?
No, nothing springs to mind.
I'm going to ask if we could please take down this document and go back to your statement, please. So back to HN 118's statement. Could we turn, please, to page 78? It's paragraph 216, please. You say here that I believe that a normal deployment was expected to last 3 or 4 years, but I was never aware that there was a maximum. I cannot be sure why my deployment lasted over 6 years, although it may have had something to do with the lack of any clear direction for the SDS and the need to maintain reporting for as long as possible without committing any new people or other resources to it. What do you mean when you say that there was a need to maintain reporting for as long as possible without committing any new people or other resources to it? Could you just expand on that, please?
Yeah, of course. I think I'm just speaking to the fact that it was clear at that stage, the writing on the wall had been for a long time that the unit was going to fold. It was just a question of when. And I think that they probably kept me out a bit longer just to maintain some coverage without the sort of without the requirement to bring in someone new behind me, because it was apparent that they would never sort of get to the stage of being launched or productive.
And from your perspective as an undercover officer, first deployed in 2001, but being there until the end, what was your view as to why the SDS was coming to an end, from your perspective as an undercover officer?
My perspective on why it was coming to an
yes.
end? It was coming to an end because I think that was the plan and the intention the moment that the two separate commands had been amalgamated into counter-terrorism command.
So SO12 and SO13.
Yes.
What about the nature of the reporting by the SDS? You've described your reporting from your perspective. Did you feel that as your deployment went on, that your reporting was of less relevance, of less significance, that there was less necessity for it? For example, you referred earlier to a thought that you had at one stage, well, surely someone else can do this from the perspective of working at a computer, for example. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I don't think I was arguing that it should be maintained and going onwards. I think really it had probably, it reached its natural consequence, and, there were bigger fish to fry, quite frankly. Resources could have, of this depth and cost and all the rest of it, would be better deployed on more serious threats, especially in the context of a complete separation, if you like, between the intelligence function and the executive function that was previously demonstrated by the Special Branch and the Anti-Terrorist Branch.
In relation to the end of your deployment, you refer to that at paragraph 213. So I wonder if we can just go back a little earlier in this statement. It's page 78. So you describe, my deployment finished before Christmas 2007. Having considered the cancellation of authority document, it seems that the official end date was the 20th of December 2007. I'd been attempting to withdraw following the German G8 summit in June, but was kept deployed because of the Camp for Climate Action near Heathrow Airport that we talked about earlier. In that respect, my withdrawal was planned, but hampered and delayed by unplanned additional requirements to continue reporting. I was fortunate to have incorporated the potential for a reconciliation with my former partner into my backstory, because this is what I fell back on as I withdrew. It is also fortunate that the Dissent Network was and I wonder if we can just go over the page, please. Much looser organisation, because my absence was far less noticeable than it would have been on the GR steering committee. Now, can you just describe what happened in the last days of your deployment? So physically what you did and where you went to next.
Yeah, as I left SCS, as bonkers as this will sound, I have got no clear recollection of the last day of it at all. By then, you were sort of just begging for mercy, and it was just very glad that it was over. Finally, somebody came in. I couldn't even tell you who it was. Somebody came in and said, "That's it, we're done. Find yourself a job. Crack on." I can remember arrangements being made for a van to arrive at my duff and clearing that out with sort of 24 hours notice, making a full inventory of the possessions that I'd accumulated as Wellings. Somebody arrived I'd never seen before in a van. Photographs were taken of the stuff. It went into the back of the van. I went to the office and handed in all my electronic,
Now, I'm going to just pause you there, because you do address this in your statement. It would help if we just have that up. Could we turn, please, to page 97 and paragraphs 267 and 268, please, on page 97. So here you say, after my deployment ended, I had no significant period of leave or time to adjust. I effectively finished my deployment on the Thursday or Friday before Christmas, took my piercings out, got a decent haircut and bought some presents, and then went to work at police premises on the Monday following the New Year holiday. When my deployment ended, I was not debriefed by anyone. I was seen as tainted by my 7 years with the SDS. And then you say at least one senior officer told me that I was damaged goods and nobody wanted anything to do with me. Who described you as damaged goods?
I do know who it was. I'm reluctant to give his name unless it's absolutely essential, because I'm not sure what good it would serve. It was somebody who had been involved in the management side of the unit.
Was it someone in the SDS?
I think he had overall responsibility for it by then, yes.
So this someone who had overall responsibility of the SDS described you as damaged goods?
Yes.
When did he describe you as damaged goods?
Very, very shortly before the end, we'd had a meeting. There was a constant flow of meetings at the end about what's going to happen, because by this stage, the new people who were being brought onto the team, some of whom were busy preparing legends and getting ready to launch, had become aware that they would probably join a sinking ship, and they were constantly communicating with me saying, look, is it worth even putting this time and investment in and all the rest of it, because it seems like we're going to fold in, probably, tomorrow, a week, 3 months, nobody knew. And it was after one of those meetings where I had gone in and made representations and just sort of got to the stage where I said, look, please, just tell us, it's fine. You almost felt like you had to give them permission, and say, it's fine, we'll be okay. It's just, just pull the trigger, let us know, tell us, that it's done, and then we will do our best to try and, there was no real sort of succession plan. I couldn't, we talk about going back into work on a Monday, I had been able to find a place to land purely through utilising some contacts, but I had no means of police, getting into a police building or premises. I couldn't even get into the building on that Monday.
The person that described you as damaged goods, was this said in a jovial way? Was it?
No, far from it.
What was the context in which it was said?
We'd had a meeting. I'd made representations and said, look, let's just let the team know if it's going to be, today, tomorrow, next week. Surely we can say that. And when people, I almost was trying to reassure him that it was okay. I said, look, although I didn't feel like that inside, he was saying, look, we're all grown-ups, we've got wide shoulders, just let us know. And at that point, we can then try and manage this like grown-up people. And it had been a bit fractious. It wasn't heated, but it was quite emotional. And I was saying it at the end, and he clearly wasn't happy with my attitude about that. And at the end, he just quite calmly and said, look, this is what's going to happen, and
Your damaged goods.
Yeah, and not to expect a comfortable landing when I got back.
Are you able to write down?
Yes.
The name without saying it out loud? At this stage, I'm going to ask you this. What is the reason why you do not want to say the name?
I'm just... It's nothing to do with any suggestion that they might still have some influence over, me at this point. I'm just reluctant to name him in a public venue for conduct which wasn't great, quite frankly. I suppose it's an inherent sense of loyalty, regardless of personal feelings. Not to throw him under the bus, really.
We may return to the name in due course. Sir, I would ask if I may have some time at this point, seeing the time, to see whether there are further Rule 10 questions that can be put in the time available, and of course to allow time for re-examination. And so I would invite you, sir, to rise at this point in relation to that.
That seems prudent. So anybody who has any questions which they wish to be put to this witness, please deal with Mr. Ramble now. Mr. Bramble.
HN 118, when I was asking you questions about Mark Kennedy, you wrote down a name on a piece of paper, yes?
Yes.
And so there is no reason not to mention that name. The name that you wrote down was Kate. Where did you hear that name from, please, in relation to Kennedy and relationship?
Well, you asked me if I knew the name of the person that I had seen him in company with.
Yes.
Yeah.
And did you know you knew the name of the person?
Yes.
And is that a name that you knew at the time or since learnt
I see.
the name?
No, I knew it at the time.
From who?
I don't remember. I remember somebody talking about her possibly. I mean, unless I've got the wrong face in my mind, that she was somebody who was involved with the dissent, and I had seen around on the periphery. I honestly can't remember where I first learnt the name, but in my mind that name was associated with her.
Did you hear that name from Mark Kennedy?
No.
The person that you heard the name from, was it someone who was an activist or was it someone in the SDS? Could you help us with that?
I genuinely can't remember, I'm sorry.
Was that Kate Wilson?
I think so.
Why do you think so?
I think because I've seen that name in reporting subsequently in the media, and that's become associated with Kate, if that makes sense.
And you're sure that you'd heard the name Kate at the time?
Yes.
Did you, when you were discussing your concerns about Kennedy with HN72, did you pass on that name, or did you mention that name, Kate, to HN72?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
You said in your evidence earlier, yesterday, that you had spoken to your wife in anticipation of coming here to give evidence at the inquiry. Have you discussed your evidence, the evidence that you have given, with any of your former colleagues? In other words, before giving evidence of the last couple of days, in advance, did you speak to any of your former UCO or even manager colleagues?
Not about my evidence, no.
When you say not about your evidence, about what, just generally the process, or what did you discuss?
No, I reached out to somebody I hadn't spoken to for 10 years after he had appeared here, when I knew that he had finished, just to say, you know, mindful, you've done it. I sent him an email. I had an email address for him, and I just sent a very quick, you know, glad it's done for you, you know, well done, nothing more than that.
This is a former undercover officer who has already gave evidence to the inquiry.
Yes.
When was that? When was the evidence?
It was recently. It was I think it was the day after he had appeared here. I can tell you who it was if I...
Yes, being very careful in terms of the...
HN3.
HN3.
Yeah.
And this was after his evidence. Anything in particular apart from you, as you've indicated, well done for completing?
No, I just sent him. I sent him I sent him a message and said, look, well done. You know, I'm glad it's done for you. He sent me a very brief reply back saying, you know, I'm totally frank. He said, yeah, it's a relief to have got it done. You know, good luck when you're on. It was nothing more than that. We absolutely didn't discuss what I was going to say in any way, shape or form.
Earlier in your evidence, when I was asking you a question about your interaction with others, you explains that your undercover identity was 5 years younger than your real identity.
About, yes, I think.
If the suggestion was that this would assist you to associate with younger women during your deployment, what would your response to that be?
Oh, I would say not at all. I think it's, it wasn't on my agenda to behave in that way, and it was absolutely not part of it. I was mindful, actually, that I was just a bit old to perhaps be developing a social conscience and coming into that sort of arena.
Could we please call up MPS 0031940? We can see that the third paragraph, individuals involved in the network thus far, include MT, Nick Did and Naima Bujela, all recently and very publicly resigned from Globalised Resistance. These activists have cooperated with a small core of other individuals more usually associated with the autonomous direct action side of the movement. This group appears to be coalescing around Atif Chowdhury and Privacy, both centrally involved in the London International Solidarity Movement, ISM. And if we go to the next paragraph, please. These ISMers and a small core of recently returned from Gaza independent activists are extremely radical in outlook, perhaps not surprisingly, as many of them have spent considerable periods of time in the Balata refugee camp in Gaza and other areas of the occupied territories. Just pausing there, the reference to occupied territories is, why is that in inverted commas in the way, and why do you describe that in that way, please? Where did those words come from? Is that you reporting the description given?
I think perhaps in my naivety, I'm just trying to describe those areas as, are currently under the control of Israel or not in that context, and that's the way they're referred to.
And when it goes on to say direct action is in their blood, and if they get organised, they could become a potent new force on the London activist scene. If this was said to have been influenced by your perception in relation to Palestinians and Muslims, the way in which you refer to in their blood and the description given there, what would you say to that accusation that you are referring to Palestinians and Muslims in a derogatory way by referring to the fact that direct action is in their blood? What would your response be to that, please?
No, that wasn't my intention, and I hope that's not what I was trying to infer. It was just my view of them at that time. In the ISM had a reputation for that more direct action focus, slightly more radical outlook, and I think in conversations with others, that's what they had said to me.
Could we take that document down and move to MPS 00028914, please? Now, I'm going to, if we see the penultimate paragraph, the one with the temporary privacy box all the way across the line. So this states that temporary privacy is a leading personality within the radical Islamic London scene. And it goes on. What did you mean by the radical Islamic scene, given that none of the organisations then described are radical Muslim groups? For example, earlier in my questioning, we referred to certain peace groups, Muslim women groups. Why did you use the descriptor radical Islamic scene, please?
I think I was just trying to convey that that was an area of activity that he was associated with and would be considered to be at that sort of edge of the spectrum.
How would you respond if someone suggested that this reporting was influenced by bias towards the individual who's covered by temporary privacy by that person's Muslim identity? Or in other words, was your reporting influenced by bias towards this individual due to his Muslim identity?
No, I hope not, no.
Could we please take that document down and move to 0526839, MPS 0526839, page 7? Sorry, 0526839. Is that published? Right. I'm going to take that. I'm going to cancel that reference because I'm told that document has not yet been published. The dissent affinity groups that you referred to earlier today when I was asking you questions about dissent, could you be specific in relation to what affinity groups under or within the dissent network you were spying upon or reporting on, please? Which, if someone asked you, please can you list what were the names of the affinity groups? What's your answer to that?
Well, the bits of dissent that I was most interested in were the bits of it that were going to organise sort of direct action type things. So there was the blockades group. There was.
I'm going to slow you down here. So
Sorry.
The blockades group, because imagine we're writing a list of them. So the blockades group.
Yeah.
Who else?
The group that were going to form the temporary climate, the eco village at Stirling. So I don't know how. I don't recall if they had a specific name, but the camp group, if you like, and that.
Can you remember any other affinity groups?
I wouldn't necessarily describe those as affinity groups. That's not really my understanding of what an affinity group is. But that as an organising bit of dissent, those were the ones that the most, the pressure for information was coming down about. It was a focus on what was likely to be the direct action around the summit.
In your evidence earlier today, you referred to message boards, threads that you would leave messages on. Did you ever leave messages that could be described as misinformation?
No.
At all? What are the nature of the messages that you would leave?
I was just chipping in with, supportive or a comment on previous posts, and occasionally I can remember putting messages up just to say that I could help out with certain bits, transpo, moving stuff around. I think that is as a direct result of one of those posts was how I ended up taking a big bunch of published material up to the camp at Stirling.
When you left these various messages on these message boards and threads, what was the username that you used? I.e., what would come up on the screen with the comments, please?
I don't remember.
I'm just going to pause. I want you to have a think about this for this reason, that, again, if the suggestion was that you have given a lot of evidence about, as your deployments progressed, you are doing more and more of your undercover work online, and as indicated, leaving messages on message boards, joining email groups. But none of the individuals who were very familiar with those message boards remember you And so that is the source of the question is, well, what username did you use? You're using all of these groups, there's message boards and threads, but what was the name? Because if you say the name that you used, whatever it was, then that would assist in that way. So I'm going to ask and press you on that. Can you remember the username or what this... Would it have been Simon Wellings, for example?
No, I don't think it was. I certainly left my email, numerous times.
Would that have included Simon Wellings or S. Wellings or Simon W. or words to that effect?
It would have included Wellings, I'm pretty sure, yes.
So the email groups you would have used, it would have included the word Wellings. But what about message boards?
No,
was there like a nickname?
No,
or
I think there was you had a friendly name, if that makes sense, or some shorter identifier. I can't remember, I'm sorry.
I have a few more questions. If you remember, please can you say it before I stop? When you were answering questions on the Jean-Charles de Menezes campaigns, you stated that you were asked to keep a watching brief, which is the way that you put it.
Yes.
What was the name of the person that asked you to keep a watching brief on the Jean-Charles de Menezes family campaign? Who was it?
I genuinely don't remember. But I in my mind, I think it was somebody at the sort of cover level. It would have been one of the DSs on the teams. I don't remember it being higher up, if that makes sense. It would have come down at a very low level, and it wasn't. I don't want to overstate that. It was, I can remember it being mentioned, and it was along the lines of, fellows, if anything does come up that we need to know about, very light touch, but just let us know if there's anything about meetings or stuff coming up.
Bernie Greeny?
I don't think so.
Stephen Tiddy?
No, he was long gone by then.
HN9?
Possibly.
Possibly HN9. Stephen Beals?
Yes, that would be the first one.
Ron Gilbertson?
No, I don't think so.
HN30?
Possibly.
HN35?
Yeah, possibly.
HN315?
No.
All right. I'm going to ask if we could please call up Noel Douglas's witness statement, which is at UCPI 37793. Could we please turn to page 11? Sorry, page 5. Page 5, please, thank you. So at page 11, paragraph 11, Noel Douglas's statement, it says, the first occasion was on the night the Iraq War broke out and Stop the War has called for a demonstration at Whitehall, which was held to one side of the road by the police. Demonstrators tried, through pushing, to get through police lines to block the whole road. I was with SW, who was aggressively, referring to you, Simon Wellings, I was with SW, who was aggressively trying to get everyone to push through the police lines. I overheard one of the commanding officers on the police side say, him and him, pointing to me and Simon Wellings, suggesting that we were being targeted for potential arrest, at which point I held back, not wanting to be arrested. Is that correct, that you were aggressively trying to get everyone to push through the police lines?
No, it's not. I'm not saying I wasn't doing some pushing and shoving. I absolutely would have been. If others were involved in that, I would have been doing the same thing, probably to the same degree that they were. To do otherwise would have been to sort of immediately show out. I'm not suggesting for a moment I was.
What do you mean by the word show out, just so that we're clear?
I'm sorry. It would have. If other people around you in the group that you you were infiltrating were behaving in that way. It wasn't as if suddenly you could sort of clutch your pearls and go back to the, get and just walk off and take no part in it. You had to accept that there was a certain level of behaviour in role that would be expected, that people would expect you to be behaving like them and doing what they were doing.
Another occasion is referred to in paragraph 12. I wonder if we could please expand paragraph 12. So this describes the Selfridges protest, and this is from Noel Douglas's statement saying that you, and again referring to your reports on this protest, but he says this, that again, here, far from merely observing, we were trying to get in the store through the doors, which were being blocked by police officer. This involved pushing. I was there, but not at the front. Simon was in front of me and was by far the most enthusiastic pusher, aggressively trying to whip up the activists, saying, come on, and even putting his hand up in the air to attempt to block the view of the police camera surveillance officer stationed in the corner of the doorway, filming everything. Again, for me, this was not a situation that was worth getting arrested over, but Simon played a direct role here in trying to create a hostile and aggressive atmosphere against his fellow police officers. So, in short, as has just been set out there by Noel Douglas, that rather than just doing enough not to show out, to use your words, you are acting essentially as an agent provocateur, being at the forefront, and again, his words, aggressively trying to whip up the activists. What is your reaction to that, please?
No, I respectfully, it would be as per my previous answer.
Have you heard the expression secret pinks in relation to a description of folders that were kept in the SDS office?
I've heard of secret pinks, but not in the SDS office.
Do you recall any secret pinks that were in relation to police accountability groups at all?
No. A secret pink to me is recognisable in my previous work on different teams within Special Branch, and as my understanding, that was a slightly separate class of, back in those days, paper files which were held in registry.
A number of the questions that I've put to you involve justification. I've asked you a number of times, well, do you think that report, for example, was justified? And in some instances, you have indicated that it would not have met the tests now. And I just want to clarify what you mean by that. In the reporting, for example, about minor matters of people's personal life and the like, do you accept that not only not justified now, but also not justified at the time? Would you accept that?
Yes, I would.
I'm going to ask if we could please take this document down and turn up MPS 0035842. The second report, Virginia Rodino. Virginia Teresa Rodino is an American activist resident in Baltimore. Rodino continues to have close links with that's the bottom report. I wonder if we just... has close links with the London-based anti-capitalist group Globalised Resistance. And then you set out Rodino's date of birth and a reference to her passport number, the date that the passport was issued, the next of kin given by in that passport, and also 2 contact telephone numbers. But why did you report this information about an American activist?
Again, because it was, those were hard data points. As we discussed yesterday, she stayed with me on that visit to London, and I put her up for a couple of nights in my Duff accommodation, and she left a passport lying around, and I recorded the details.
Where did you? Can you remember where her passport was? How did you come across her passport?
It was. I think it was left on the coffee table in the little, very small living room that I had in that flat.
Did you go through her bags?
No. I gave her, when she stayed with me, I gave her use of my bedroom, tidied it up a bit, laundered the sheets, sorted it out, and then when she was staying, and she said, no, don't be silly, I'll sleep on the sofa, and I said no, and gave her the room, and I kipped on the sofa. But no, I didn't go through her stuff at all, apart from clearly the passport.
Apart from, sorry?
Apart from clearly recording the details of her passport.
Going back to the various forums, the online forums, indie media, to what extent would you agree that you contributed to political discussion and contributed to the discourse in that way, expressing views?
Very limited.
When the True Spies documentary was aired, did your managers tell you to be careful about your interaction with those that you were spying upon? Did they ask you to take extra care? Be careful not to get caught out as a result of what was aired in the True Spies documentary?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it was a topic of conversation, but I think they already would be advising people to be careful. I don't recall any specific advice along those lines.
The core participant that we are calling Rosa tracked down the SDS office. She called the SDS office a number of times, and it meant that the SDS office moved. What is your recollection of that, please?
Yeah, that was really quite early days for me, I think. I recall that it happened, that suddenly the office was moving at very short notice and there was a bit of a flap on. And I don't think I even knew at the time what exactly the reason was, but in subsequent conversations it came up that they'd received a telephone call along those lines, and obviously that was a compromise and they had to move.
Was it, did it stand out particularly in your memory because it was something that happened early on in your deployment?
Possibly.
Was there a lot of discussion about it?
No, not a great deal, no.
Was the fact that a female had called the office alert you to the fact that Jim Boyling had had a relationship whilst undercover?
No, I don't think it was. They kept information about that really pretty tight, yeah, and no, I don't think those two are linked to my mind at all. Was
it not a topic of regular conversation then that the whole SDS office had to be moved because Rosa had been in a relationship with Jim Boyling and had managed to work out what the phone number was?
No, I can't remember the context. I mean, it was certainly quite a long time after we'd actually moved. I learnt that someone had, I think that she had seen some telephone records or something, but I don't remember it being directly associated with Jim at all.
What is your evidence of the first that you became aware that Jim Boyling had embarked on sexual relationships whilst undercover?
I think I saw it on the BBC News website, I think. I'm pretty sure it was in mainstream media reporting.
So those are my questions.
Is there any re-examination?
No, thank you, sir.
I'm afraid you're not quite finished because there is a topic to which I must return. It was what you were asked about yesterday afternoon, the abortive suicide stunt when Sharon visited the United Kingdom. Have you read or heard any of the evidence of Guy Taylor, Noel Douglas or MT?
No.
As you will appreciate, I have both read their evidence and listened to it given in this room. Their evidence is clear and unequivocal about who the individual was who was proposing that the stunt be staged. You know the name of that individual.
Yes.
And it's not to be mentioned.
Understood.
Apart from the contemporaneous and subsequent reporting attributed to you and your own evidence in this hearing room, I know of nothing which would cause me to doubt that the evidence that they have given about who it was who proposed the stunt. Some of the reporting attributed to you, you have told me, is not yours and is in some respects inaccurate. It is never too late to admit that mistakes have been made and that, however firmly held the belief may be, you might be wrong. I want you to reflect on that a moment and tell me whether you might indeed be wrong about who it was who proposed the stunt.
No, I don't believe I am. That is my clear memory.
Thank you. Your evidence over the 2 days is now complete. I do not anticipate that you will be asked to come back to give evidence again, but in the unlikely event that you are, I trust you will comply. Thank you. I don't know whether tomorrow's evidence is going to be the subject of any restrictions. Does anybody know that?
So may I just confirm the
Yes.
position?
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have sprung this on you. I should have asked outside, but anybody can assist, then I'd be...
Significant restrictions,
Yes.
so maybe I can advise you in relation to what those are.
I don't need to know what they are, but there will be live evidence tomorrow, but as you've heard, it will be subject, for legitimate privacy reasons, to restrictions. Until 10 tomorrow.